Welcome to the Red and Bold Show. I am your co-host, Marc Adams, and I'm joined by my other co-host, or my only co-host, I guess, Anthony Robertson of 49ers Cutback. And we are thrilled to be joined by the great, the one and only Matt Maiocco. Matt, how's it going, my friend?
It's going well. Oh man, I tell you what, this every year there comes a point where you think like, man, the off seasons, really, it's a real long off season, and
Yeah.
then at some point you kind of blink and then you look up and you go, oh my gosh, where did that long off season go? And that's kind of where I'm at right now. Rookies report on the 16th, veterans on the 23rd. Tomorrow I'm heading up to Tahoe for celebrity golf tournament. No, I'm not playing, but should be some 49ers people up there. I think Kyle Juszczyk is scheduled to play this year, which I didn't even know he played golf. But Juszczyk's up there, Steve Young, Jerry Rice.
Wow.
I think that might be it from a 49er standpoint, but I always go up there and get a few interviews for the podcast.
Well, I tell you, whether it's somebody like Anthony here who does a lot of podcasts, or me who's writing for 49ers Web Zone a lot, it's hard in the off season, as I'm sure you know much better than we do. But thank you, Brandon Aiyuk, for giving us a lot to talk about and write about this off season. It's kind of made the time go by a little faster.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think he's kind of going stir crazy. I think
Yeah.
he's getting very uncomfortable with nothing happening. I think he's bored. He's doing like the latest thing, which is really odd, is that it sure seems like Jaden Daniels is sending him practice film.
Yeah.
And then in which, if I were the Commanders, I'm sure there's already been a conversation like, dude, what are you doing? And so, yeah, that was kind of odd that apparently, Brandon Aiyuk puts up on his TikTok that he's watching Commanders game or practice film.
Hmm.
And so that would be a concern, certainly for the Commanders, number one. And then Ayuk maybe not showing the greatest judgment in the world by putting that out there either. So it was interesting to listen to him on the Pivot podcast because
Yeah.
he really seemed conflicted. And he would say something and then 5 seconds later kind of say the opposite. So you kind of got the sense that it's kind of getting to him, this uncertainty of whether he's going to get a multi-year contract extension from the 49ers this offseason.
Well, I wanted, while we're talking about Ayuk, I wanted to ask you this because I've heard you a couple of times kind of warn 49ers fans that, hey, this may not end the way that we're all expecting, where he signs the extension like Deebo Samuel did, or Nick Bosa, Fred Warner, George Kittle, those guys. What do you think might happen between Brandon Aiyuk and the 49ers?
Oh, I have no idea, but I can tell you, what the scenarios are. Now, remember with George Kittle, with Fred Warner, with Deebo Samuel, and also with Nick Bosa, each of the past 4 seasons or off seasons, they've signed big money guys to market value contracts. Now, when you're at a certain spot in your roster building, if you have a good player, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be at a premium position, come up for a new contract, you pay them. You pay them.
Right.
If you like them, you pay them. Now, the 49ers are different because they've done it now 4 consecutive off seasons. And then they readjust Christian McCaffrey's contract. And, it doesn't even include Trent Williams' contract. And so at some point, if your roster is full of really good players, you can't continue to pay market value.
Right.
It doesn't work. They did that. I was really surprised that they did it in 2020 mid-March of 2020 when they decided to go ahead and trade DeForest Buckner, because to me, he was like everything you wanted. He was Fred Warner. He was George Kittle. He was the guy that great on the field, great in the locker room, great everything. And so they made the decision then that they were going to part ways with DeForest Buckner, get something for him. They were under the impression that Javon Kinlaw would be a good player in 4 years or through the course of his 4-year contract. That never happened. But then they were also able to trade back one spot, get Brandon Aiyuk, while also retaining Armstead and Jimmy Ward. So that's what the 49ers have to weigh, is that you've already paid Debo. And if you sign Aiyuk, probably means that Debo, this is the final year of his contract, that they will probably part ways or try to work with him, do something similar to what they did with Armstead and Kyle Juszczyk, which is, hey, we'd like to keep you, but here's the numbers we want to keep you at. So at some point, behind the scenes, Parag Marate is running the numbers and saying, okay, here's the scenario. We can keep Brandon Aiyuk, but it might mean that a year from now, both Diamador Lenore, Charvarius Ward, Dre Greenlaw, Aaron Banks, those guys are gone. So that's where I think the first thing that I started to look at was right around the draft. I was always of the opinion from the season ended, they'll keep Brandon Aiyuk. You got to keep Brandon Aiyuk. He's a really good player. But then, when they re-sign Jennings to a good contract for a number 3 receiver, and, after taking another receiver in the first round, heck, this year he might be the number 4 receiver. But they're paying him, $7.5 million a year. And then, they redo McCaffrey's contract. So it just makes me pause a little bit. Whereas the previous 4 years, I didn't see any scenario where they wouldn't get the deals done with the 4 guys I previously mentioned. This year, I can see where they have to make a decision. And I think it's a logical and reasonable decision that they could make, that, hey, instead of re-signing Aiyuk for this number, let's re-sign these guys, multiple guys, and let Aiyuk walk. Now you kind of tossed it open, so I'm sorry for talking so long, but
no, that's okay.
Do I see Brandon Aiyuk playing this year? Absolutely. I just don't see any other scenario. I don't think it makes sense for the 49ers to trade him now unless some team says, hey, we'll give you 2 number 1s, we'll give you a number 1 pick next year, a number 1 pick the year after. And then what I would see is, the 49ers would then, again, if they don't get this multi-year extension done with him, they would franchise him at the end of the season and probably trade him at that point. So I think it's possible. I would almost say 50-50. I've talked to agents who think that, they're not going to re-sign him. Other people I talk to say, yeah, I think, they got to give Purdy, got to keep Purdy's favorite target in there. The other philosophical conversation is, I know what the market value is for wide receivers, but are they really that valuable?
Yeah. Especially in this offense.
It's not, especially in this offense. And how many wide receivers were taken in the first round of this draft? So it's not like you can't find plug and play wide receivers. And it almost, again, a long philosophical discussion we could have on this, but gosh, doesn't it almost make sense to just draft wide receivers every year? And if you can keep a guy on a second contract at a reasonable price, you do it. But if he's up around that $30 million mark, I don't know, just keep that conveyor belt rolling, because it just seems like there are too many really good wide receivers for wide receivers to have that place in the market that they currently have.
Yeah, and one interesting thing that I heard Grant Cohn say is that he pointed out that Ayuk had less touches last season than Elijah Mitchell did, which shocked me. I looked it up because I thought that can't be right, and it was. So do you really want to pay 30 million for a guy that didn't even touch the ball as much as your backup running back did?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the quality of the touches. I mean, obviously,
Yeah,
we're
that's
talking
true.
big time yards every time he touches the ball, and so I mean, but that kind of plays into the other part of it is that 49ers have so many guys on offense that teams, game plan against. The number one guy that teams are game planning against is Christian McCaffrey.
Right.
After that, who is it? It might be Debo because of where he's going to line up. When a defense breaks the huddle, what are they doing? Where's Debo? How are they going to, okay, watch him for the jet sweep. Oh, he's in the backfield. Okay, if he motions out, like there's a lot of stuff that has to happen for a defense to identify where Debo Samuel is. Number 3, probably George Kittle.
Mm-hmm.
Probably like where is he lining up? Is he going in motion? Is he tight to the line? Is it going to be the safety come down? Is it going to be whatever the nickel? There's a lot of stuff that teams have to kind of game plan against, and I would say the reason Brandon Aiyuk had, what do you have, 70 catches for a lot of yards, but I think a lot of times, he's kind of game planned, offensively. If teams take this and this and this away, then Brandon Aiyuk not only is open, but then has room to run after that. So, I mean, that's not to take anything away from Brandon Aiyuk. I think he's a really good receiver, and he does things on that offense that is the best on that offense. He's the best route runner. He's the best, I think, pure wide receiver on the team. Debo is a really good football player because can do a lot of different things.
Right.
But, I think that's, I don't know if they were looking ahead to, hey, I might not be around much longer. Let's go get the best route runner that we can get at number 31 overall. And that's kind of how I sense what they did with Ricky Pearsall, is that he's a good route runner. He can beat man coverage, might be able to beat man coverage as well as anybody on the team. And so that's an area where, people are looking at how can the 49ers improve from last year? Well, just look at how they lost the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
And that's one of the areas, is that
Right.
they simply couldn't beat sticky man coverage.
I know that Ant has a couple of really good wide receiver questions. I'm going to let him ask this because I'm really interested to see what you have to say about this.
Yeah, I'm really curious with the addition of Ricky Pearsall, Jacob Cowing. Are the 49ers going to keep 6 wide receivers this year, especially with who they've got at the end? They've got really good players. You've got Danny Gray, you've got Ronnie Bell, you've got Chris Conley. That decision who you're going to pick as wide receiver, potentially 6. If you don't keep 6, you're not keeping any one of those 3 guys. So I'm curious, do you think they're going to keep 6? And what 6 are you the most likely to keep if you're the San Francisco 49ers?
Yeah, I think they keep 6. Yeah. So here's a name you didn't mention that, when you start to look at that 6th receiver, I don't think it's going to be Chris Conley, because they've proven that they don't need him on the 53 man. No one's claiming him. He can be on the practice squad. I think Danny Gray is kind of at the end of the line there. He just hasn't done anything, hasn't shown much. Ronnie Bell was a guy a year ago, showed a lot of promise, but I think he has to be able to contribute in other areas. So I would say this. I would say, assuming nothing crazy happens, you got Aiyuk, Debo, Jennings, Pearsall, absolute locks. I think Cowing brings an element that that they would like to keep with the speed, and just kind of give him a chance, give him the chance that Danny Gray's had the past 2 years and didn't capitalize on. And then to a degree that Ronnie Bell had the chance to last year, didn't capitalize on. The one guy that you didn't mention, which is kind of keep your eye on this part, again, going back to the Super Bowl, they need somebody back there reliable handling punts. And, Ray McLeod, I don't know if they were going to re-sign him anyway, but, that play was a huge play. And I'm not just talking about the ball hitting off Luter and him deciding to just try to scoop it up going 100 miles an hour instead of just falling on the ball and protecting it. But why the heck didn't he catch that ball in the air?
Yeah.
I mean, that's why that he should have come up. I mean, that was a 40-yard punt in the air. I don't know how far back he was, 45 yards. How could he have misjudged that ball so badly that he didn't catch it in the air? So you need somebody, and it's plays like that cost team Super Bowls. I mean, we could go through a lot of plays in that Super Bowl that cost them the game, but that was definitely top 3 or 4. So that's why I mentioned Trent Taylor, is that he's reliable. He's done it before. Can he be a slot receiver? Sure. But right now, I don't know who else they would have back there. Watching Jake McCowling in the offseason, he didn't look super comfortable fielding punts. Pearsall looked pretty good fielding punts, but do you want to put him back there doing that? So I would say kind of my sleeper pick, I guess, for that 6th receiver would be Trent Taylor, just because of the value he brings in that area. But I would say it's put up or shut up time for Ronnie Bell and Danny Gray. Again, Chris Conley proved to be valuable with some injuries last year and then in the postseason, but I don't think he's going anywhere if he doesn't make the initial 53-man.
That's really interesting, and it's going to be interesting to see what they do with the kickoff. Not just the punt game, but the kickoff returns as well. I want to back up to when you were a rookie beat writer for the 49ers, covering the team. That was 1995. Is that right?
Yeah, I was around the team 92, 93, 94.
Okay.
Doing home games, and I'd cover them one day a week, like on a Thursday, I think it was. So I was around the team a little bit before that, before just going, full-time, year-round kind of thing. And, that team, you'd walk in there and there's, Jerry Rice, Steve Young, Brent Jones, Harris Barden, Jesse Sapolo, Steve Wallace. They were, on the defense. Merton Hanks and Tim McDonald, Eric Davis, Ken Norton, Gary Plummer, Bryant Young, Stubblefield. So it was a pretty star-studded cast of guys in those early years.
That had to have been thrilling. I'm glad to know that you were with the 49ers, or you covered the 49ers some before that, because I was getting concerned when I saw that you started covering them in 95. I was thinking, man, that was the they were the defending Super Bowl champs. So I was don't put it all on me. I guess you can. It's been this is my 30th year covering the team. I'm year round. Yeah. So up to that point, I was covering, preps and college and other areas, general assignments, and then, football season, 49ers, like I said, basically 2 days a week, game day for home games, and then during the week, and then in baseball season, Giants, A's, kind of backup type of role. So I was kind of a utility guy at that point. What is all the years that you've covered the 49ers, what is the most memorable press conference that you ever covered?
Oh, I think there's only one that really, the one that really stands out. I was sitting in the front row for this one, and it was pretty amazing. I mean, the stuff that was going through my mind. It was Mike Singletary's first press conference.
I Want Winners, that one?
Yeah, and I'm just like thinking, like, oh, is this like a Saturday Night Live skit? Like, what is going on here? Including the part where he says, I'd rather play with 10 guys and get penalized. And I'm thinking, wow, he doesn't even know the rules. Like, that was, I remember thinking, like, should I be concerned? Like, is this guy having some sort of episode? That certainly was one of them. Or, I mean, that's clearly number one. Jim Tomsula's first press conference was a doozy. It was, I remember walking into that press conference room after he got hired, and the press conference room was colder than it's ever been. It was probably, mid to low 50s in there.
Oh my gosh.
And I just remember how much Tomsula was sweating. And I remember, I think it was Matt Barrows asked him about, like, what kind of offense are you guys going to run? What's going to be the, and at that point, I don't think we even knew at that point who his staff was.
Right.
And he tried like heck to put together a staff, and nobody would want to come work for him. And so he kind of rambled around a little bit about what the offense would look like. And then Trent Baalke, who was up there, like basically grabbed the microphone and said, I think in there somewhere, he said, we're going to run the ball. And I was like, oh boy, who's in charge here?
Yeah.
The other one, another one that stands out, and this is from the early years, was the Steve Mariucci. Oh, no, it wasn't Steve Mariucci. It was the George Seifert press conference where he stepped aside as head coach. And at that point, Marc Trestman was the offensive coordinator. And somebody asked about Trestman's future as offensive coordinator. And, it was like kind of a not great scene. It's like, the guys were, Carmen Policy passed the microphone to George, and George's like, I'm not the coach here anymore. And he passed the microphone to somebody else. And then Eddie DeBarlo just got on the mic and said, he's gone. And so those are some three memorable ones that really stand out.
Last year I asked the same question to Matt Barrows, and he mentioned the Tomsula introductory press conference. And I think he said that after the press conference that you guys looked at each other and said, well, see you here next year.
What? I wasn't going to mention Barrows because I didn't know, but he's the one who said that.
Right.
And it was pretty dang funny. We were walking out of that press conference room. It was me and him. And he said that. He said, well, guess we'll be back here next year. And I remember thinking, like, I remember hearing, like, people talking about, winning the press conference. That was a big thing in like college or whatever. You win the press conference. Tomsula did not win the press conference. He lost it, 49-0. But yeah, I remember people always saying, like, well, the press conference, if they hire this guy, they'll win the press conference. But winning the press conference only lasts one day. True, but I think it did show kind of where he was as far as being, I was going to say a little, but I'd say now a lot too big for him, being the head coach of a football team after not even being a coordinator, being a position coach, the defensive line coach. I think that was a very large stretch.
Yeah, I was listening to the press conference as a fan and just felt kind of nauseous. Nothing against Tomsula, great guy, but when you come from Harbaugh to Tomsula, that was just a pretty stark difference.
You know what? It's funny because I've gotten to know him a little bit through the years, maybe more than a little bit through the years. But when you would talk to him, and even after that disastrous press conference, we got together, as about three or four of us, in one of it. I think it was in his hotel room in Indianapolis at the Combine. And when he let his guard down and would talk about players on the team and what made guys tick, like he he had this really good sense of the individual, what made him tick, how you can work with a guy. And it's funny. So that was probably, so that would have been like mid-February. That would have been, 3 weeks, I guess, a month after that disastrous press conference. And I remember then thinking, like, maybe this can work. But the one reason why it really couldn't work is because he just simply couldn't put together a coaching staff.
Yeah.
And so for a guy who was a defensive line coach, who had never been a defensive coordinator, you have to hire a defensive coordinator, who knows coverages and everything else. You have to hire a complete offensive staff. And, I remember talking to people at that point, and it was like, who would coach, go there as an assistant coach? Because, no assistant coach worth their weight in, coaching acumen would want to go somewhere where the head coach very well could be a one and done. And so, those are some of the elements working against him and working against the 49ers through that time.
Yeah. I want Ant to ask you about Talanoa Hufanga, but before he does, is this the year that Roger Craig gets selected as a Hall of Famer?
Yeah, I know we talked about this last year. And I think I was pretty optimistic about it last year. And I can't specifically tell you why I was, whether it was stuff I was hearing or just kind of a feel for it.
Yeah, I think there was some talk in the voting room among the Hall of Fame senior voters that there was a lot of discussion surrounding Roger, and that's a very positive thing, and that some of the voters believed that maybe this next year would be his year.
Yeah, that sounds familiar, and I forget any specifics that I might have heard, but I do remember just kind of feeling like, okay, this year might not be the year. In fact, I do. Yeah, there were two of the people last year who were selected as finalists that were surprising. One of whom, our pal, didn't even make it through. Didn't take that next leap to be Hall of Famer class of 2024. So yeah, I think he has a chance. I think he has a good chance. Here's the thing, though, Mark, is that this is obviously 49er centric. You talk to 31 other teams, and maybe not all 31, but let's just say 24 of them have guys that they feel are like being ripped off. How could this guy not be in? Some of them are old timers, some of them more recent, but do I believe that Roger Craig, deserves to be in the Hall of Fame? Absolutely. Well, yes. But, it's so tough to get in as a modern era guy. Well, it's tough to get in as a modern era guy because only 5 of those guys can go in per year.
Yeah.
And so you could be a finalist for 7, 8 years like John Lynch was. And, at some point it could fall either way. Either you get fatigue of like, oh my gosh, this guy's up again. Well, he wasn't top 5 the first 6 years. So why is he top 5 now? Well, it's because that pool changes every year.
Yep.
And then once you fall into the senior committee, once you become a senior category, then it becomes even more difficult. Thankfully, the Hall of Fame president and the board increased the number of senior candidates or senior finalists that could be nominated every year to 3. So that I think it bodes well. And yes, I mean, I'm with you. I know you've done a lot of work trying to open people's eyes for Roger Craig. And I would like to see him get in soon, like now, like yesterday. Because I think, Roger's kind of gone a little bit behind the scenes. I used to talk to him quite a bit. He used to be, out there at 49ers games, Levi Stadium and everything else. And he's not quite as public as he was. So I know it's bothered him for a long time. And I know it's bothered, a lot of his supporters for a long time. And you just hate that it's gotten to that point where it's, been such a negative thing for so many people. So I hope my gut instinct a year ago, I hope that is the case, and I'm not sure when they're meeting this year, to get that list together. But it's, as I recall, kind of the whispers I was hearing was that it was very close last year, and that there were some, at least one surprise. So with 3 more candidates up, this year, I think it's more confident than I've ever been.
Good. Ant, go ahead.
Yeah, about Talanoa Hufanga. Hufanga has said that sometime during training camp he may come back and then be the goal ready for week 1. I was wondering what your sense was on him, if you think he will be ready for week 1. And then also, what happens if he's not ready and he has to start on the PUP list? Who's going to run with Jair Brown? Is it going to be George Odom? Will it be Malik Mustafa, or will they have to go out on the open market and try to find somebody?
Well, they also have Eric Harris, who's, kind of a fringe guy at this part of his career, but he started a lot of games. I don't get the sense that Mustafa is, well, we'll see once training camp starts up and the pads go on, and that's when he puts the pads on, he stands out because he's a strong guy, and a physical player. It very well could be where they look at that position like they did tight end, where they went out and they got Logan Thomas at tight end, a veteran guy to step in and be, a contributor year 1. Justin Simmons, how much is he going to want? I think they got to keep the door open for that, but they also know that every dollar, above minimum that they're paying for one player to come in, it cuts into the cap for this year and next year and everything else. So my guess would be that Hufanga is at least close enough to start the season, assuming there's no setbacks. They expect him to be ready at some point in training camp, ready to practice, ready to get out there and play. So my guess would be that as long as he doesn't suffer any kind of setback, that George Odom would be the guy for, if needed, for 1 or 2 games, and then Hufanga gets in there. My guess would be that they don't go out and get a veteran safety whose name, we might know. There are still a few guys out there. So that's kind of what I'm thinking with that. I think Odom is a good, obviously a good special teams guy, really good special teams guy. Mm-hmm. And I think good enough that you don't lose much if he's asked to step in for 1 or 2 or 3 games.
I like that 91649er thinks it's funny that you are blaming Barrows for the Tom Sula thing.
I'm not blaming him. I'm crediting him. No, it was hilarious. I would have taken credit for that one long ago, but no, I'm not blaming him at all. It was like spot the timing. If you could have been there, Matt Barrows is a really funny guy, by the
way. Yeah, he is.
When we were leaving that room, that press conference room, and we turned the corner, and he just kind of looks at me and said, "I guess I'll see you back here next year." It was the funniest gosh darn thing. So no, I'm not blaming Barrows. I'm not throwing him under the bus. I'm giving him much credit for that line. And now that the fact, what was that? 20? That was 2016.
2014.
No,
15.
Yeah, 2015. Yeah. Chip was 2016. Yeah, so that almost 10 years later, let's give credit where it's due.
Yeah. Josh in our chat asked what your thoughts are on the cornerback room. Could this be the strength of the 49ers
I don't know if it's
team?
a strength because there's still enough questions. I think until we know what that nickelback situation is, I don't know if it'd be a strength, but I I mean, I think Charvarius Ward is, among the very best in the NFL.
Yeah.
And I think Lenore is really solid. And I think Lenore, with his ability to play inside or outside, could make him like if I'm sure the 49ers have had these conversations already, but those are two guys that, man, if you can sign them before the season starts to extensions and kind of take the risk out of them, remaining healthy through this year. Whoa, I'm just my my laptop's on a roller here. I would think that those are two guys you want to kind of pinpoint. I would say maybe Lenore, just because of his flexibility. I think Ward is now at the point where everybody knows about him. He's going to get paid, so maybe you kind of just say, yeah, if you keep one, you keep Lenore because he's younger. Probably get him for a better price. And then there's Isaac Yadam is a guy that I don't know too much about, but he seems really solid as a third corner. So that's the only reason why I'm not maybe as high on the cornerback position is because there's still too many unknowns. Is Yadam going to be on the outside and Lenore slipping into nickel, or does Renardo Green come in and play nickel? Or is Renardo Green so good on the outside that he goes to the outside and Lenore plays nickel? I mean, when I look at the 49er defense last year, that was a one thing where they just simply couldn't figure it out, to the point where the Super Bowl, biggest game of the year, they end up doing something they hadn't done all season.
Yeah,
which is kind of this revolving door of how they were going to run their nickel defense. But I do think that there's some talent, a lot of talent there. I'd say they have, the four guys who I think are pretty darn good. And then that's not even counting Luter, who I know they're high on, Womack. Not all those guys are going to make the team. And then I think Ambry Thomas's time, I think 49ers seen enough of that. And I haven't even mentioned Rock Ya-Sin. So they probably do have more depth there. It's just like, whatever, 4, 5, 6, and 7 are probably better than they've ever had, but nobody cares about 4, 5, 6, and 7. Your top three guys need to be really good.
Yeah. Last question. Is it possible that the 49ers could have a worse record in 2024 and yet be better than they were in 2023?
Yeah, I think so. And I always think that, there's this element of chance, there's an element of luck, that just, it's true. I mean, football more than any other sport, I think, where, it's injuries, it's guys fitting together, it's what you see a player do with one team. Is he going to do that with the next team? Constantly guys rising, falling. Like the defensive line is something that, that's another unknown. I mean, I think it looks like they did really good work in losing guys that they figured to lose, and then bringing in guys that maybe don't have the name recognition as some of the guys they lost. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, those guys could be better players or better fits for the system. I always get this question, like, is Brock Purdy going to be better this year than he was last year? And I'm like, how are we going to measure that? Statistically, probably not.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, how can he be better statistically when he set the franchise record for passer rating, which takes into account, all the stats that matter. And so I guess the same thing can be said. Like, he could be better, behind the scenes, knowing where to go with the ball, being decisive, reading defenses and coverages and doing this and that. But the stats might not bear it out. So I think that's kind of where I would go with your question, is that, yeah, they could be better, but maybe the stats don't bear that out. And then, what do? Do you just measure the entire season by how they do in the postseason, assuming they get there? Um, Last year they got in the postseason, they both got alternately lucky as hell and
Mhm.
then unlucky as hell. I mean, the 2 games that they won to get to the Super Bowl, a lot of things had to go right for them to
Yeah.
win those games.
Yeah.
And then conversely, in the Super Bowl, frankly, a lot of things had to go wrong for them to lose that game. So it's
Mhm.
kind of crazy, how the sport is and how ultimately I think most people kind of judge it because, most people just kind of let's flip to the final page of the season and see what happened. Did they win the Super Bowl or not? And when you're
Right.
the 49ers right now, I mean, if we were to move ahead to, the middle of February, and I would say a large percentage of 49er fans and probably people on the side of the 49ers organization would be, tell me how the season ended. Did the 49ers win the Super Bowl? They did? Successful season. Did the 49ers lose the Super Bowl? Or did they not win the Super Bowl? They did not win the Super Bowl. Not a successful season. That's just the way it is, man.
Yep.
That's the way it is when I think you create that kind of expectation now, having put themselves in position to compete for and win a Super Bowl, 5 of the past 6 seasons. If you don't get it done, it's not a success, and you have to kind of roll with the consequences after that.
Yeah. Hey, Matt, thanks so much. I kept you here longer than I said I was going to. Here, Marc Brown said you guys got Matt 49ers legend. So there you are. You're
Wow, look at that.
legendary status. And so
Wow. Thank you.
enjoy the rest of your summer. Enjoy the golf tournament. Tell Steve Young that his best friend, Mark Adams, said hi.
I will definitely do it.
I'm sure he'll quickly agree.
Sure.
But thanks so much for joining us, and thanks everybody for tuning in and for watching the Red and Bold show. Ant and I will be back on Wednesday for another regular episode of this. So thanks everybody. Have a great rest of your day.